Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. It is arguably the most exciting week of the year. It is, of course, draft week, not draft day, the film starring Kevin Costner. But as I said towards the end of the podcast last week, it is one of the most enjoyable parts of the NFL season, purely because, a bit like games, you think you know what's going to happen, but then you actually play the games and something incredible shows up and you're just like, wow, never really thought that it could come to that. And the NFL draft is really no different. I'm sure that there are plenty of mock drafts out there. I doubt that any of them is going to be 100% correct. I've done mock drafts over the years, and there have been times where, in fact, I believe even last year, I was off after the third pick, because that's when the Houston Texans and the Arizona Cardinals made their trade. So there is a lot that goes on draft night that you expect the unexpected, and that's kind of what we tune in for. Because as much as we tune in for what's going on with our team, we use the Pittsburgh Steelers as my team for the example. Are we going to go tackle? Are we going to go center? Are we going to go defensive back? I've seen people say we need to go for wide receiver. Which one are we going to go for? As much as you are fascinated by your own team, there's always the fascination about what's going on elsewhere and what shocks and surprises that there are going to be, and I'm sure Thursday night will throw up plenty of them. But before we get into that, I do want to use this time to, as I usually say, thank you very much for joining us. But if you are new to the show, then feel free to like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are on. If you are returning to the show, then thank you very much for coming back and spending a little bit of your week with me once again. And thank you very much for your company. Right, so on with the show. And as has been the sort of format for the past couple of weeks, there hasn't really been that much in terms of news in the NFL. It has predominantly been centered around the draft, so a lot of the stories are coming out about that. I just want to start off by touching on something that we did talk about last week, and that was the Atlanta Falcons and the Minnesota Vikings and what is going to become of their alleged tampering situation. As I explained last week, basically there are some allegations from the NFL that the Atlanta Falcons didn't go about their acquisition of Kirk Cousins in the correct and timely manner, shall we say. The example that Mike Florio pointed out, and could well be what started it all off, but it's a good starting point, is that when Kirk Cousins showed up on NBC on Pro Football Talk ahead of the Super Bowl, he talked about how him and Kyle Pitts, the Atlanta Falcons tight end, had discussed about who was going to take the number 8 shirt, because that's the number that Kirk Cousins wore with the Vikings and with the Washington Commanders and then Redskins. So you would assume he'd want that number, but is Kyle Pitts going to give up his number? So on and so forth. And that has sort of been one of the main cruxes of the argument of, did the Atlanta Falcons go about getting Kirk Cousins in the right way and in the correct timeline? Now, the investigation has been launched by the NFL, and by the sounds of it, we are coming to the end of it, because as per Adam Schefter tweeting out this morning, the NFL's investigation is ongoing and could reach a conclusion as early as this week, per sources. Sources believe that the discipline, which is likely to involve draft picks, is expected to be more severe for the Falcons. And this does just go back to what I was saying last week, which was, in part regurgitating what Mike Florio gave the example of, and his example was the Arizona Cardinals and the Philadelphia Eagles from last year, and the way that the Arizona Cardinals hired Jonathan Gannon to be their head coach. He was the coordinator with the Philadelphia Eagles, but again, done in the incorrect manner, and so they decided the punishment was that they would trade picks. So the Philadelphia Eagles would get a chance to move down, and the Arizona Cardinals would be bumped, back up the draft a little bit. Now, when Adam Schefter says there that it is expected to be more severe for the Falcons, you wonder, obviously it's going to be more severe in terms of what punishment, because the Minnesota Vikings aren't going to be punished for anything. They let a free agent go. It's not on them. They didn't do it. They didn't do anything wrong. This is going to be on the Falcons. So I believe my interpretation of what Adam Schefter tweeted out is that the Falcons are going to be given a more severe punishment than what the Arizona Cardinals were last season. So last season, just for to refresh your memory, the Philadelphia Eagles received the number 66 pick in the third round, and in exchange, the Arizona Cardinals, in return, got the 94th overall pick, which was again in the third round, and a 2024 fifth round pick. So obviously there was just a trade of picks for Jonathan Gannon to go to the Cardinals as a form of punishment for the Cardinals for doing it the right way. Now, I think that when he says more severe, I think it's possibly going to be down the Mike Florio route that he has hinted, that it might well be a first-round pick. Now, whether this is as a result of the Falcons should have known better from last year to say, oi, you don't do this because this is what the punishment is. We've laid it out. You should know what the punishment is and don't do that again. Or maybe it's because it's a quarterback is involved and it's a franchise quarterback is involved. So as a result, it is likely to be more severe for the Falcons. Now, the only intriguing thing about this is going to be how severe it gets. One thing that does throw a potential punishment into the mix is the fact that the Minnesota Vikings do not have a second round pick. They traded that away. That's gone to the Houston Texans. They would have been picking at number 42, but as it stands, there is still the possibility of a couple of trades between now and Thursday. But as it stands, they do not have a second round pick, which you might think might be the way it would go. Okay, these two teams last year, it was a third round pick. If it's going to be more severe, okay, this is going to be a second round pick, and then whoever is next and all the teams moving out there, from there on, is going to be a first round pick. However, because the Vikings do not have that second round pick, I think that the NFL is effectively been put in a position it is going to have to be a first round. It is going to have to be a trade of first round picks, which would mean that the Minnesota Vikings jump, as I sort of said last week, they jump from 11 and drop all the way down to 8, rather. Which, as I said last week, might not sound the biggest, but it is still a pretty sizable change in the scale of the NFL landscape, because you look at, we are assuming that the Minnesota Vikings want a quarterback and they're going to want one early. We assume that is what the mock drafts have sort of been saying. But having to make that jump from 8 down to, for the sake of argument, 4 with the Arizona Cardinals, I don't think they would give up that number 4 pick because that lands them Marvin Harrison Jr., confirmed. Or be it to number 5 with the Los Angeles Chargers. Having to make that jump from 8 to 5 is a lot easier than having to go from 11 to 5 because you don't have to give up as much. Maybe they swap a fourth round pick with them as opposed to a third round pick that you would have had to have also given up to make that jump with the Cardinals or the Chargers. And now, also as a result, if they do make that jump from down to 8, what does that do for the rest of them? There has been talk about whether or not the New York Giants will take a quarterback, given everything that's gone on with Daniel Jones. That changes everything. It changes the draft quite a lot. Even just that move from 3 picks and then even further down. Which is why I said, and I think the way that Adam Schefter has sort of tweeted about it, we need to get this punishment needs to be done beforehand. If there is going to be draft picks done, it needs to be done as soon as possible. Not just because it's fair for the Vikings, because it gives them, time to prepare. It gives the rest of the league time to prepare as well. To know, right, are the Vikings going to have to give up X amount to go there, or can we give up that amount to make that jump up? It needs to be done for basically to make NFL draft day go that little bit smoother, not just for the Falcons and the Vikings, but for the rest of the league. So hopefully the punishment comes out within, hopefully before Thursday. I don't want to be waiting around till the day of the draft or by the time Roger Goodell stands up on the podium for the first time, not knowing what the punishment is going to be. I'm sure there are a lot of fans of teams and probably front office personnel of teams that feel quite the same way. They don't want to be waiting. And on the subject of waiting, that perfectly brings us to our next topic. Because the NFL have been somewhat sneaky. I don't know if sneaky is the right term, but they've been very, very calculated with how they've handled one of the main attractions of the NFL draft is obviously having the players there. It is every player's right to whether or not they want to be the one to go up on stage and get a hug from Roger Goodell and, be presented in front of the fans that are going to be there, or if they want to maybe be at home with family. You see the famous, Brett Favre picture where he was lying down in very casual attire, shall we say, when he was selected back in the day. There's always that thing, and of course, every player has the right of what way they want to handle it. But the NFL have done something this year that I think is somewhat clever on their part, but at the same time takes away from some of the drama of draft day. So what they've done is they only invited a group of people to attend the draft this year, a select group of players. Those players are, and I'm just reading this out in alphabetical order, Terrion Arnold, Jaden Daniels, Marvin Harrison Jr., J.C. Latham, Laiatu Latu, I'm presuming I've butchered that name and I apologise, Drake May, Quinion Mitchell, Malik Neighbours, Rome Odunze, Darius Robinson, Brian Thomas Jr., Dallas Turner, and Caleb Williams. The man who we, again, assuming nothing disastrous happens between now and Thursday, the man who will be spending the least amount of time in the green room because he will be going number one. Now, there were, according to various reports, other invitations sent out. They wanted to keep it select. They wanted to keep it to about 15. But the way that this has been reported and the logic behind this, again, I've seen this from a variety of reports, is that they want to do it because they only want the cream of the crop, shall we say, to be there, because they don't want the situation that we have seen over the past couple of years. Will Levis is arguably the most famous recent one. You can make the argument for Joey Porter Jr., but the biggest one, I suppose, in NFL history is Aaron Rodgers, when he had to wait all that time and the cameras were on him when quarterbacks were being taken and he didn't get the number one pick and all that sort of stuff. They don't want to have the players, in a way, embarrassed. That is the assumption. That is what has been reported by a number of places, that they do not want to have players sat around unnecessarily and potentially be embarrassed and not being selected as early as they perhaps thought they could and should have been. Which, again, I kind of understand from the NFL's standpoint. That, again, if they don't want to embarrass them, fine, I kind of get it. But at the same time, you are taking away from, again, one of the main storylines every year. Regardless of draft, regardless of position, regardless of talent, there's always that one player that starts to slide. Again, for the sake of argument, this year, Drake May, the quarterback out of North Carolina, was for so long presumed to be the number 2 quarterback. Now it looks as if Jaden Daniels is moving up there, and JJ McCarthy could very well be up there. And then once you get past those, we assume that the Vikings are going to take a quarterback, but what if they don't? Does that mean that he then starts to slide? It's part of the drama of it, and I just don't see what it's a great story as well. The players that have had to sit and wait have used that as a chip on their shoulder. Tom Brady famously, keeps track of all the quarterbacks that were taken ahead of him. Amon-Ra St. Brown, the receiver for the Detroit Lions, knows every single player and what pick they went ahead of him in his draft, because he used it as a chip on his shoulder to say, you should have taken me above, ahead of all these guys. So I think to do that just robs us that little bit of the drama. And again, I get protecting the players, but at the same time, to take away the drama and, again, a possible motivation tactic from the players, it just doesn't sit right with me. Again, the players they could have decided to stay at home. They wanted, but obviously they wanted to go there. They want to be up on stage and hug Roger Goodell when their name is called and everything. But at the same time, are you coddling the players too much? I think is the best way to put it. Which again, not necessarily a bad thing, because the way that the NFL has, been talked about in the past about mistreating players, in more severe situations and cases than this. But it's still a way to get back in some people's good graces. But I just don't agree that I just don't think this is the way to go. Maybe you could have a word with the broadcasters to say, oh, if X starts to slide, don't pan directly to him. Because I know it's NFL, the NFL Network and ESPN. Don't pan directly to him, or don't do it after every single pick. Maybe do it after every third, whatever. There are ways to manage it. I'm not sure if selecting who gets to come and arrive and doing it specifically for your TV situation, or I just don't know if that. I just think it's one step too far, if you're asking me. Now, one team that appears to be in a little bit of limbo when it comes to what they're going to do on draft day appears to be, at least from all sort of reports and talking heads on in the media, is the Dallas Cowboys, because there was a discussion on First Take this morning, ESPN's First Take, where Stephen A. Smith and Dan Orlovsky, two, one's a commentator, talking head, one's an analyst, both incredible at their jobs, got into a sort of a discussion about whether or not the Dallas Cowboys need to be looking at drafting a quarterback, because they have been trying to come to an agreement with Dak Prescott to be their long-term guy. And they've had negotiations, but nothing seems to be sticking right now as Dak Prescott approaches and enters the final year of his deal with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, you can say whatever argument you want about whether or not you think Dak Prescott is good for the Dallas Cowboys. I think he's good. He's not great. You look at what happens in the postseason, you can make the argument that maybe they should be getting someone else. Again, there are other factors to it, injuries and what have you, and players around him. Not all his fault, I gather, but if you want to say there's the argument to change quarterback completely, you can with Dak Prescott. And that led to the discussion on First Take this morning about whether or not the Dallas Cowboys should be looking to draft a quarterback relatively early in the process, and start to maybe look for the future. And Dan Orlovsky had a very interesting take on it. And he was saying, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but what he said was, if they draft a quarterback early on in the draft, they've given up on this season. They only have 3 picks in the top 175, and to use one of them on a quarterback, that will be them waving the white flag. And you know what? I agree, because the Dallas Cowboys are a team that are in win now mode and can win now if they get the right pieces surrounding them. They've lost a couple of key players this off-season. They seem to be very prone to the injury bugs over the past couple of years, so they need additional depth pieces at key places. So if they were to draft a quarterback, again, this is talking strictly early in the process. If they want to take a punt in the 6th or 7th round and try and find the next Brock Purdy, or the next person to sit and develop, in a way, find the next Dak Prescott, because he wasn't an early pick for them. He was a 4th rounder back in 2016, so it shows they can find decent quarterbacks later on. Before that was Tony Romo, who was undrafted. So this isn't to say take a quarterback at all. I think the point that the guys on ESPN were talking about was taking a quarterback early and saying, right, this is going to be the franchise guy. And as I said, I agree. If they take one early, that means they are punting on this season, because they need players that can make an instant impact and an instant starter on this team, or maybe just that additional depth that we're talking about to cover for injuries. So yes, whilst the Dak Prescott situation is up in the air somewhat and undecided, if they do go early with a quarterback and say, right, this is our insurance policy for moving on to the future. Say it's, one of the quarterbacks that is potentially going to be falling into the second round, like a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix Jr. I have seen sliding into the second round of the draft when you've got the likes of, as opposed to the Williams and the Mays and the Daniels and the McCarthys that seem to be going in the first. Bo Nix and Michael Penix seem to be drifting into the second. So if they pick one of them, for instance, then yes, I agree. That is punting. That is punting on the season and saying, no, we're focusing on the long-term future, which not necessarily a bad thing, but after the comments that Jerry Jones has said about being all in this season and then not really doing that much in the off-season, this is your chance to solve that, as it were, and to prove that you are all in. And getting a quarterback early is not going to do that. Again, if they want to take Spencer Rattler in the 6th, say, go for it. That's an insurance policy for Dak Prescott and someone who you think could do well. But if you're getting him in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, then you're saying this upcoming season doesn't matter. It's all about the future. And that is also probably going to be, also if you take a quarterback that early, you are probably telling Dak Prescott exactly what you think of him, and that is that he's out the door. And then is he really going to be motivated to give it his all this season if he knows he's not going to be a Dallas Cowboy come 2025? So a lot to think about there for the Dallas Cowboys, and hopefully they make the right decision. And just before we go, there is time for one story away from the NFL this week, and this one has blown up the footballing/soccer world. So, for those of you who follow the Premier League, you will probably know where I'm going when I say the words Nottingham Forest. For those of you who don't, this has been the biggest story of the weekend, and it's been a pretty big and important weekend in terms of soccer back in the UK. So what has happened is Nottingham Forest were playing an important game against Everton it's called a 6-pointer. It's a big important relegation game. Called a 6-pointer because it's 3 points that you could get and 3 points that you could take from your opponent. So 6 points. I'm sure in hockey, you talk about like 4-point swings if you're playing a team that you're battling in a playoff spot for. So it's the similar sort of vibe, as it were. However, they were not happy with some of the decisions that went against them. Now, I'm not here to say whether or not the decisions were right or wrong by the referee. I mean, some of them were, but besides the point. But the way that Nottingham Forest have handled it has been absolutely incredible. So after the game, they tweeted out on the official account. This isn't some fan. This isn't the manager speaking after in a press conference. This is the official social media account. Have said 3 extremely poor decisions, 3 penalties not given, which we simply cannot accept. We warned the PGMOL, the Professional Game Match Officials Limited, the people who are in charge of the referees and organising who goes where for what particular game week and disciplining them and so forth. So we warned the PGMOL that the VAR, video assistant referee, that's the equivalent of the replay official in American sports, is a Luton fan. Now, Luton are a team that Nottingham Forest are also competing with in order to stave off relegation. So that is important. So the VAR is a Luton fan before the game, but they didn't change him. Our patience has been tested multiple times. NFFC, Nottingham Forest Football Club, will now consider its options. The only thing that I could somewhat make a comparison to is the way the New Orleans Saints reacted after the 2019 NFC Championship game when they had that very egregious pass interference call not called against the Los Angeles Rams, which they believe would have won them the game rather than going into overtime and then losing in overtime. That's the only reaction I could sort of make a direct comparison to. But even so, it is incredibly funny that, again, this isn't a heat of the moment in a press conference manager talking about. That was sent by the social media executive, probably signed off by, I say probably here, probably signed off by people above them in the club, probably from the owner, probably from Mark Clattenburg, who's someone who was an ex-Premier League referee and who they have brought in as like a referee assistant to break down what a referee does and say, right, this is why we didn't get this decision, this is what we can do moving forward to help understand what the referee is looking for and help the players interpret the rules better. That was his job. I just think this is incredibly fascinating. And if we're being honest, in the coming days and afterwards, they have not stopped there, because in continual response to that, they have said Nottingham Forest has today submitted a formal request to the PGMOL to release into the public domain the audio recordings between officials during yesterday's match against Everton at Goodison Park. The club has requested this be shared for 3 key match incidents: Ashley Young's challenge on Giovanni Reina, Ashley Young's handball, and Ashley Young's challenge on Callum Hudson-Odoi. We firmly advocate for the broader football community and supporters to have access to the audio and transcript for full transparency, ensuring the integrity of our sport is upheld. Again, you think back, if you're an NFL fan, which I'm assuming you are if you're listening to this, think of how incensed the Los Angeles Rams, the New Orleans Saints fans and the team were in response to that. It's pretty close the way that they are going about this. And I just think it's incredible that Nottingham Forest feel that they are so being held back and discriminated against in a way. But again, it's the way they have handled it, which has been absolutely hilarious. And honestly, if you are a social media person, just keep track of what is going to happen over the next coming days, because it is going to be hilarious to see. A, if they backtrack on this, I don't think they will. But then B, if they don't, the doubling down that they are going to do. Just the level of unhingedness that is going to come from Nottingham Forest as a result of this, especially if they do not get their way and the audio is not released. It is just going to be... If you want to see petulance, if you want to see how the British do petulance, by all means, I urge you to keep track of this story, because you are going to absolutely love it. Even if you don't understand the game of soccer/football, and you don't understand, what's at stake, however, just pay attention just to the drama, because you are going to absolutely love it. Okay, that's just my bit of advice to you as we wrap up this show. Once again, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to listen to us. As I said at the start, if you are new, feel free to like and subscribe on whatever channel you are listening to. If you are new, thank you very much, and I appreciate every listen that you get. Don't forget, you can reach out. We are also on various other social medias. They are all at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on TikTok. Sorry, I was forgetting what the last one was. So on all those platforms, feel free to reach out and subscribe for additional content on those platforms as well. But if you just prefer to listen to this, then by all means, that's fine as well. But until next time, and until after the draft, when I'm sure there will be plenty to decide to dissect and plenty of interesting stories to look through. Until then, thank you once again so much for listening, and until next week, take care.